In this video I'm going to discuss the factors that have helped me to lower my heart rate during my easy runs over time, and how I'm able to run kind of mid 5-minute kilometers at my easy pace, so kind of in the 130 beats per minute. So in the following tips you'll see exactly how I've done that. So the first thing is that tip number 1 is actually that this takes years of practice. There's no quick fix to this. The things that I'm going to run through in this video will help make small little differences in the short term, but over the long term what you need to do is just work continuously and be consistent with it, and that's how you will actually make big improvements over time. So the first short term tip that I give is to slow down, lose your ego, and don't worry about pace at all. The only thing you want to focus on when you're trying to run easy at a low heart rate is your heart rate. The pace doesn't matter at all, the distance doesn't matter. I'd run by time as well rather than pace. So yeah, make sure you're going slow enough to keep your heart in whatever range you're trying to hit. So it kind of depends on age a little bit. For most people though, if you're running below 150 beats per minute and ideally below 140 beats per minute, then you're probably going to be somewhere in your easy zones in terms of running. So the reason why we want to do this is that your heart is a muscle. It's really important to remember that. What we want to do is build up our muscles over time. If you think about it, in the gym you're not going to go straight to doing maximum reps. What you want to do is build it up over time. That's exactly what we're doing with our heart here. So once again, don't focus on pace whatsoever. Don't worry about your Strava averages or anything like that. Purely work on your heart rate, and that's all you want to focus on. If you do need to slow down to a walk at certain points to stay within this heart rate, that's fine, but the tips that I'm going to give further on in this video should help kind of prevent that, at least in the long term. So my next tip is to work on your cadence and your stride. So cadence is how quickly you're moving your feet, and stride is how long each step is. So take your right foot from where it takes off to where it lands, that's your stride length. What I tend to do is to shorten my stride, and I'm taking a similar amount of steps. So my cadence, I tend to try keep it at 180 average, which my watch shows me. So some watches will show you. If not, you can check after your run, and again, rough idea. But what we're mainly focusing on, shorten your strides. So it'll take less energy because you're technically jumping less of a distance. So yeah, basically just less energy to do that, and you're just moving a bit quicker, but not kind of more intense. It'll also put less impact on your body, which is a side benefit, but the main thing is to not run at your normal length, just shorten it a little bit. So it's something that as you over time work on it, you'll kind of get a judge of how short to make your stride in order to be efficient and keep your heart rate low enough. The next tips I'd focus on is your breathing. So there's a couple of things that I do with my breathing that help me lower my heart rate. The first one is I go 4 steps, breathe in for those four steps, and then breathe out for the next 4 steps. I try to do this repetitively, and it just creates a rhythm with your breathing, which kind of stabilizes it a little bit. So if people are new to starting out, they don't necessarily have to go 4 steps each side. You can maybe try out 3 or every 2, but basically the quicker you breathe, the higher your heart rate's going to be, just because you're pumping your body a bit more. So what I would advise is to try do at least 3 to 4 steps in between breathing, and just remember that for them whole 4 steps you're breathing in, and then the whole 4 steps you're breathing out. So it becomes quite rhythmic, and then you just kind of naturally do it. You don't even have to think about it after a while. Second thing is, when you're breathing, is to try actually breathe into your stomach. So as you're breathing in, your stomach should expand. We're not trying to breathe into our lungs. It's actually more efficient to breathe into your stomach. It'll actually fill the lungs with a lot more oxygen than trying to actually directly breathe into your lungs, if that makes sense. So what we want to see is kind of taking these deep breaths. They go right into your stomach, and your stomach will expand. One way of doing this quite efficiently is to breathe through your nose. For me, it just tends to go kind of directly to my stomach when I do it that way, and naturally again this will slow you down compared to breathing in through your mouth. So this is doing 2 things. It's slowing you down, and at the same time it's actually bringing more oxygen into the body, which is then being used. So your heart is working less than it would be if you're breathing in less. Next tip I'm going to give is to plan your route. So what you want to do is to avoid big hills. Slight hills are okay, but they're still going to raise your heart rate, but big hills are going to drive your heart rate way up. So we want to avoid them, and the way to do that is by knowing your route beforehand, and therefore you'll know the route, so you'll know if there's any hills and how to avoid them. Just take a different route if you need to, skip a corner, whatever it takes. Just avoid the big hills when you're trying to do easy runs. If you're not able to avoid hills, then that's fine, just go ahead and do them. If you need to slow down to a walk, that's fine, do that. If you can't slow down your jog, slow down to a jog even, and stay within the heart rate, do that as well. The other option is to just go up the hill as normal, keep your same level of effort, but just ignore that on your run. Don't mind that your heart rate is going to rise above the level we're looking at. It should come back down to normal then as you get back down onto the descent of the hill, or the flat after the hill. So whichever it is, your heart rate will lower down afterwards. Just take it nice and slow afterwards and you'll go back to normal. One big factor for me that always lowers my heart rate is adding in speed work. It basically will improve your heart's efficiency at the slower speeds compared to the speeds that you're running when you're doing speed work. So examples of this are once a week, maybe do an interval session or a threshold session. Basically these are running at quite fast pace. An interval is usually shorter than a threshold session. Threshold will be basically, it's like an interval. You might run for 5 kilometers or so, or depending on what kind of distance you usually run, it would increase or decrease, but you're going to run at a really hard pace that you probably won't be able to sustain for more than maybe 40 minutes to an hour if you're kind of well trained, and even less than that if you're less well trained, which you might be if you're listening to this video. So if you are less trained, how I would suggest to judge your threshold is, if you want to set a time for how long you're going to run that threshold, let's say even if it's 15 minutes, run at a pace that you think you can run for 15 minutes and that you'll not be able to run for much longer than that. So you might be able to do an extra couple of minutes if you had to, so you're not going to be all out and dying by the end of it, but you're going to be really struggling by the end of it to keep going. That would be how I would judge a threshold pace. So you might just do one 15-minute session, or if you are finding it a bit easier, you might do 2 15-minute sessions with a 5-minute in between, where you're just going at a nice slow pace to give you a chance to recover. So that's more if you're a beginner, and then if you're more experienced, you probably know your own idea of what thresholds to run at. In terms of intervals, they're just going to be basically like a threshold but shorter. So we might do 400 meter intervals, we might do a kilometer interval, maybe up to a mile interval, and after that you're probably moving more into threshold work. So speed work, it'll be individual to you, but it will help lower your heart rate at the easier paces and even at the faster paces over time. So it's a really good one to add in. But you still want the majority of runs at an easier pace, and then maybe 1 speed session a week, maybe 2 if you run 6 or 7 days a week. So one last tip is that a chest strap is the most accurate. You can use a smartwatch, they do work, but you will want to Google how tightly to strap them up to your wrist. Usually they have to be quite tight to actually be anyway accurate. And the main difference between a chest strap and the watch is that the chest strap is going to be nearly constantly reading, whereas the watch might only check your heart rate every second or every 2 seconds. So it'll just be a little bit slower updating. So when you've gone over your heart rate, it'll just be a bit slower to let you know. But you don't need to invest in this chest strap necessarily. It's only kind of an additional device. So I hope this video has helped. If you have any questions or feedback, let me know. And yeah, like I say, hope you enjoyed, hope you found it useful, and thanks for watching.